Hi, welcome back to Chess Endings for Beginners, Part 3. This is going to be probably a 12 or 13 part series on basic chess endings for beginning chess players. My name is Sean Press. I'm a FIDE master based in Canberra, Australia. The content of this book is based on a book called Chess Endings for Beginners by J.H. Blake, which I'm holding up here. It's a very old book. It's a very thin book. And it contains 124 positions for beginners to kind of understand in chess. And as this is the third one in the series, I'll give a bit of a recap. I've gone through 10 positions in each episode, and we're up to position number 21. Basically, the goal here is to understand the very beginning ending positions that you get. There is a degree of memorization for the very basic positions, and I think this is necessary. But once you've memorized the standard positions, how to win when you're with extra pawns, how to draw if you're trying to save the game, you can then use that knowledge to extend that to positions which are a little bit more complicated, but you can find a way of simplifying essentially into the positions that you need to win. One good tip to remember here is if you're trying to win, promotion is your goal. If you're trying to draw, stalemate is your goal. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but promotion to win, stalemate to draw is certainly a good start. So let's get on to position number 21. And this is white to play and win. And the first move for white, to an extent, is a fairly simple one. And we're just going to play king here. And it gives black a few choices. One interesting line straight up is this move here for black. And instinctively, when we first start playing chess, capturing is one of the things. Turns out that if we capture, it's not going to be a win, it's going to be a draw. Won't go into great detail about that. Instead, I'll just show you a cute little trick here. And that is literally you play king c6, and you actually just ignore the fact that your pawn on a5 is under attack, because when your opponent takes, which is generally the best move, any other move actually just allows you to take the pawn on b6 with the king, then your next sneaky move is just to play king here. And then you've swapped into a position which is a fairly standard one, where this pawn is just going to one by one march up here and promote, because the king is guarding all the squares needed to queen. There's no stalemate trick, by the way, because this pawn is free to move. So that's a nice little trick to remember in this position. The other choices here, of course, are moving the king, either to a8 or b8. So we'll just look at the king going to a8. So we drop the king in here. King has to go across. And then when we play a6 here, certainly forcing a capture. Not quite, but I'll go into that next. If we take, don't take with the pawn, because if you take with the pawn, it is a no and draw, because the king will just, black king will just hide in the corner and can't be shoved out. But when you take here, then you have two choices. If the king goes here, we push the pawn up. King goes here, we push the pawn again. And again, black's only choice now is to move the king to this square, and then the white king will come here and guard the queening square. After here, the other choice, of course, is if we move the king in this direction and this direction. So we move the king here, then pawn up, king up, sorry, just allows the pawn to move up and make a queen. These positions, if you started on chapter 3, by the way, are covered in chapter 1. Very basic ideas that we need to master there. I suppose you might argue that I don't want to capture, and I'm hoping for an idea like this. King in the corner. We can take. King goes back here. And again, we just put our king here. And then if the king goes here, then we just put our king here. And again, we're making a queen. When I say there's a degree of memorization, certainly you should know these ones almost automatically. So if you do get to these positions, especially short of time or in the stress of tournament chess, you can play them automatically without freaking out. So king b8 is the other move in this position. And again, we just play king b6, king goes to a8, and in this case, king here. And then when the king comes up, we go for the same idea. We push the pawn here. And if we take, then of course we're just marching through. There are a couple of little sidelines on that one. Not going to go into too much detail. There is a link in the first video of this series to the Lichess page, which I'm using for this work. You can go through and play these positions yourself if you wish. Okay, chapter 22. Same position, except it's black to move. Now, I've discussed this before, but sometimes in endings it does depend on whose move it is. And we get what we call a Zugzwang position. So if I play King B8 now, which is the right move, King C5, then I play here, this position you're holding the draw. Again, not going to go into too much detail, but essentially black is going to keep the white king out for as long as possible. There's one thing that'll probably be covered later that you've just got to be careful of, and that is a line that kind of looks like this. I'm not going to say it's exactly this line, where the goal here is to keep the king away too far. Okay, but once you get to that position there, this dirty trick wins the game. Okay, because either the pawn is queening, or in this case. But if black doesn't wander too far away from that side of the board and instead tries to keep the king just tucked in the corner, and I said I wasn't going to show you it, but I will show you it too. For example, here, 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 okay, in this position it's stalemate, okay, because the king's got too close and this king is stuck in the corner, and that's a defensive idea that black will use. As I said at the top, promote to win, stalemate to draw. Okay, moving on to the next position, and this is to another set of positions here. White to move, black to win, and it's almost the same as the previous position, except in this position, in chapter 22, it was white's move again, and also the pawns were further up the board. They were 2 ranks up, 1 rank up. Now they're further back, and that gives white some more flexibility in avoiding too many bad things. So we play the check, try and keep you out, and the king goes here. King tries to stop, so we play that. King goes here, and then we go here. Now, the other important thing about the pawns being further back and everything essentially being up 1 more rank is there's no stalemate trick. The black king isn't trapped in the corner. The black king is going to be able to shuffle normally between these 2 squares. And eventually white will march across and capture this pawn using a technique called shouldering, and we have looked at that in the previous lessons. So moving on to 24. Similar position, in this case a lot longer. It's still black to move in this case, white to win. So we go back, we go here. So we're trying to hold this position here, head for the corner, here, king here. But now, once we get this position, king goes back. Now, the important thing here is if we push the pawn to b6, it's stalemate. Okay. There are a couple of different ways I suspect of winning in this position if my brain hasn't turned to mush. But there's one key trick again. You might be tempted to play this move. Pawn goes up here. And then you're tempted to play this move, thinking next move I'm going to queen. But with the king on this square and the pawn sitting here, you've actually stalemated your opponent. Okay, so you've just got to be careful of that. Instead, king goes here, king here, king here. And then again, we get to this position where black has choice of moves. And what we kind of do here is a little sneaky idea that if the king goes to a7, we pop our king to c8. When the king goes here and the king goes here, and then we push the king up here, we get that position that we saw slightly earlier, where the pawn goes up, we take, and now we push through. And we're doing this by kind of forcing black to eventually put the king on a square they don't want to put the king on. And if they go to a8 instead of a7, the white king doesn't go to c8 like before, but it goes here, because again, once the king goes here, then we push, again, we get the same situation. Okay, but it's just a question of making sure that the king goes to c7 before the black king has to move to a7. Once the king moves to a7, we just get this a6 push to win the game. Okay, but if we have the king on a7 and the queen, white king on c8, it does not work. Okay, so 25. Let's jump ahead. Okay, this is black to move, white to win. Now, this looks a lot harder because the white king is a long way away. The black king is a lot closer to the pawns, but still the arrangement of these two pawns side by side down here is quite helpful. So let's have a look. So king goes here, and obviously one of the things you will learn with these endings is that you need to use your king to support your pawns. Cecil Purdy, amongst other people, gave some advice years ago, which is don't push your pawns until your king is supporting them. And not supporting them where they are, but supporting them where they're going to. So king goes here to block. We head back here. Now, king can't effectively keep the king out of the way, so we play b4, we play here. And when we play b3, we don't take, because obviously black will happily draw by just capturing the last two pawns. No, the trick is to play here. And then what will happen is this king will eventually march its way across to capture this pawn. E.g. here, 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 and then when we go here, this king has to move away. We take the pawns, and king and two pawns against king connected like this is a win for white. There was another line I looked at, which is pawn check. King down here, king d5, king here, and then you play a4. And the idea here is that if we take and take, this pawn's unstoppable. It'll just run to the end of the board. And if we play b4 with the idea of if this pawn starts to run, black will take this pawn and then try and promote the b pawn. White just has a completely simple, no rush, just play king c4, defend your pawn, and then run the a pawn. Okay. Sometimes we do throw away winning positions by just impulsively playing the first obvious move rather than the most sensible move. Up to position 26. This is one of these checkmate in X number of moves positions here that I said before. Sometimes we have play and win. This one's a mate in 3. White's easily winning. You can see that, no problem. So the discipline for a position like this is, excuse me, to find the best and fastest solution based on the rules. So it's actually promote to a queen. Promote to a knight, I should say. Promoting a queen's coming next. And that gives black only a choice of 2 squares, a7 and c7. So we go to a7, then we promote to a queen. And then there are 2 choices in this position. Queen b6 is one, and queen c5 is just checkmate. All the escape squares are now covered. Pretty efficient. We get hide in the corner, but then we get a different mate, which was the knight retreating, discovered check, going this way. And the knight covering these 2 squares and the pawn covering the square. Lots of arrows to show you where everything's covered. But all the way back here, the second move was here. We still promote to a queen. And in this case, there are no other squares that the king can move to except back to b6. And then we get our familiar queen c5. Mate in 3s like this, fairly easy to solve, but they do discipline you in calculating the right moves. Always good practice. Okay, moving on. A similar position, 2 pawns against 1. King's well placed. White to move and win in this case. The previous positions we saw had A and B pawns. It's now B and C. Generally, B and C are going to be easier to win because there are less stalemate tricks. The risk with the A pawn or the H pawn is that if we swap the B pawn for the B pawn, the A pawn isn't often enough to win the game. But in this case, if we swap the B pawns, the C pawn should be enough to win the game. Let's just see how this works. C5, king here, push up. Very good. King here. Okay. Takes and takes is a fairly straightforward win. Okay. I'll just point that out here and here. Because if we play this, 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 and as long as we remember to play this move, we're winning. Okay. This is a well-known win. because we play the king goes, we play the queen down, king here, down, and then we just get our familiar, let's march the pawn through idea. So taking doesn't help. So instead, run to the corner, and then the key move here is we can take, there are two winning lines here, even though the book only gives one. King c7 check, take, and then we just take back this way. And we have the similar ending that we saw before. As I said, you memorize the early ones, so then when you get more complicated positions, you can just play for them. This, to be honest, did work as well, because once we played king here, this is also a mate. And I think this line is actually a little bit simpler, to be honest. Taking and then just going around that way is a little bit more direct and probably easier to remember. Skipping to the next one here. There are, to be honest, a few solutions to this one, I think. But we'll go for the one that the book, I think, talked about. So king c3, d5, and then because you've got two pawns here, you can just play this move here, e3. So when the king starts going backwards, you just play king here to attack the pawn. When they defend the pawn, you play here. Again, if they go to this side, you can just play this move, because when they take and they take, you're getting essentially a position where you're going to put your king in front of the pawn, okay, but eventually that is enough for you to win the game based on, well, for example, king here, king here, king here, king here, and then if the king goes in, then you just start going this way. So once you've got your king in a position to escort this pawn up the board, it's a pretty simple and straightforward win. There are other lines back here. After king c3, we could try and keep the king in front of the pawn. Just block here, d6, c3, king c5, and then we can play e4, and that squeezes the king because it can't go to the position it needs to get to. If the king goes backwards, we just start marching our pawn up the board. Okay, like in the similar, marching our king up the board first, like in the similar position. While if we play d5, the move here is to play this. Go past, and then suddenly black is in serious trouble because they've got to go back to try and stop this pawn from queening, and in the meantime, you'll either round up this pawn or, you know, basically something that looks a lot like this, and then suddenly you've got no more moves to protect the pawn. So, and then you just lose the pawn. And if you try and be a little bit smarter by trying to play the king, say, here, okay, here, and then here, okay, you've got a couple of simple winning ideas here. Probably the one that works for me is this move, and then this move here. Because when the king has to take one, then you've got your position once again where you've got your king in front of the pawn ready to escort it to the end of the board. Okay, that's a fairly long example, but all the moves are fairly straightforward once you know the basic idea of using your king to protect your pawn's advance. Okay, two positions to go. Again, funnily enough, black can draw this one. Okay, the book gave one solution, but again, I suspect there are a couple of other solutions for this one. Suggested king here. Okay. c3, then d5, then e3 as we had before, but after king c5, king up, okay, king c6, and if we move the pawn up, no, the king up, sorry, like this, we can block, okay, and if we try and convert that to a position which we know about, we get this situation here. And the problem with this situation for white is the king has to go back to next to the pawn, not in front of the pawn. And if the king is next to the pawn, and black knows what they're doing, almost always it's a draw. Okay. And even if we go here, okay, again, the key move here isn't to take, because if we take, the king is actually one rank in front of the pawn, which is winning. We just ignore. We go here. And again, now the idea is if we take here and we take back, Once again, the king is next to the pawn, not in front of the pawn, and again, black should draw this position if they know what they're doing. Okay, lucky last for today. Okay, and that is white to move and draw. Now you think, okay, this position looks relatively complicated. And in fact, this is a position you might get in a club game. Most of these are fairly theoretical. You're probably not going to get in a club game. I would regard this as a position that you would definitely get in a club game because you've got to worry about this pawn over here running down and making a queen. So you don't have time to try and drive black away and capture this pawn and promote the B pawn because this pawn's on the board. Black, on the other hand, has to worry about losing this pawn for nothing and then having white come charging across, push them out of the way, and then losing this ending. So it's actually, even though it says white to move and draw, it's also black to play, or black to defend. So we play king here, and we play king here, and then we play king here, and we play king here, and we play king here. Now, I'll come back in a second to a much longer idea, which you might start thinking about. So say we king g3, so we play king here, we still want to defend. And now about here, if this was in a real club game, white would go, well, if I just move my kings around, nothing's going to happen. It's time to make a run for it with my pawn. And the idea is that black now has to go chasing this pawn, and then I can win one pawn and try and capture the other. And it goes like this. King over, king takes, so far so good. King here, king here, king here, king here. And now it is certainly the case that this pawn is going to fall. So the B pawn will be captured by white, but if you're black, don't panic. Show you why. King here, here. Let's just make life difficult. King here, king here, king here. Okay. We go here, still making life difficult. King here, we go here. And then finally white triumphs and takes the pawn here. But it's black's move. And once black goes here, this is a draw, which we saw very early on as well. Because essentially what black will keep the white king from advancing using what we call the opposition. And instead, to make progress, white will move the pawn up. But once the pawn is moved up, the king is beside the pawn, not in front of the pawn, and then black will hold that position. So that's the 10 positions for today. Slightly more advanced than the last couple of episodes. I do recommend, if you haven't seen the last few episodes, go back and have a look at the last few episodes. I'll put a link in the comments on YouTube for the first episode, which will then have links to both the Lichess study that I'm basing all this off, plus the other videos in the series as well. As I said, my name is Sean Press. I'm a FIDE master based here in Canberra. I am putting these series up just for new players, just to get a hang of chess endings, so that when you kind of work out how to survive your openings and survive your middle games, you don't get to the end of the game and then, unfortunately, toss it all away. So until chapter 4, I'll be seeing you later.